The smoke from the charred beans stung Theodore Sullivan's eyes as he cursed under his breath, watching yet another meal turn to ruin. The small ranch house outside Tucson filled with the acrid smell of burning food, a scent that had become all too familiar over the past 4 weeks. Since Martha passed, he'd been trying and failing to manage on his own, his pride preventing him from admitting that cooking was beyond his capabilities. Theo to most folks in town wiped sweat from his brow with a soot-stained handkerchief and squinted through the window at the Arizona Territory's harsh landscape. It was 1878, and the unforgiving summer sun beat down on his modest cattle ranch. At 32, he'd built a decent life for himself and his late wife, but now he wondered if he could maintain it alone. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention from the ruined breakfast. Through the rippling heat waves, he spotted a wagon coming up the dusty path toward his property. Theo frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not this early in the day. Abandoning the smoking pot, he stepped onto the porch, hand instinctively hovering near the 6-shooter on his hip. Old habits from his days riding with the Arizona Rangers died hard. The wagon slowed to a stop, and Theo's expression softened when he recognized Abigail O'Connor sitting atop it. The schoolteacher from town, with her chestnut hair and practical demeanor, had been Martha's closest friend. She'd been checking on him periodically since the funeral, though her visits had become less frequent as the weeks passed. "Morning, Mr. Sullivan," she called, setting the brake and climbing down. At 28, Abigail moved with the confidence of someone who knew their purpose in life. "I thought I might stop by on my way to the schoolhouse." "Miss O'Connor?" Theo nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Kind of you, but it's a fair bit out of your way." She smiled, a knowing look crossing her face as she sniffed the air. "Something burning?" Theo grimaced. "Just breakfast. Nothing to concern yourself with." "Seems to be a pattern with you lately," she said, gathering her skirts and mounting the porch steps. Without waiting for an invitation, she brushed past him into the house. "Martha mentioned you couldn't boil water without burning it." Inside, Abigail surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye. Unwashed dishes from several days had piled up, and the remains of previous cooking disasters were evident everywhere. Theo followed her in, suddenly embarrassed by the state of his home. "I manage well enough." Abigail raised an eyebrow and approached the still smoking pot on the stove. She peered inside at the blackened mess that was supposed to be beans and bacon. Without a word, she removed her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and reached for the pot. "Move over," she said firmly. "I'll stir the pot." "That's not necessary," Theo protested, his pride stinging. "Mr. Sullivan," Abigail said, her green eyes meeting his, "you've burned every meal for a month. It's time someone intervened before you starve to death." Something in her steady gaze made him step back, allowing her to take control of his disastrous kitchen. He watched in silent admiration as she efficiently scraped the ruined breakfast into the waste bin and began anew, cracking eggs into a bowl and slicing bacon with practiced ease. "I can pay you," he offered awkwardly, "for your trouble." Abigail shot him a look that silenced him immediately. "I'm not here for money. I'm here because Martha would be heartbroken to see you living like this." The mention of his wife's name made his throat tighten. "I'm doing the best I can." Abigail's expression softened. "I know you are. But accepting help doesn't make you weak, Theodore." The use of his full name startled him. Few people called him that anymore. "Theo," he corrected automatically. "Theo, then?" She nodded, turning back to the stove. "Now, do you have any coffee that you haven't burned beyond recognition?" Despite himself, Theo felt a smile tug at his lips. "In the pantry. Though I can't promise its quality." As Abigail worked, Theo awkwardly set the table, conscious of her presence filling the empty space of his home. The kitchen soon filled with the aroma of proper cooking, reminding him of mornings before Martha's illness had taken her. "How are the cattle faring?" Abigail asked, keeping her attention on the skillet. "Well enough. The drought's been hard, but we've got water in the creek still." "And you're managing alone?" Theo nodded. Hired the Anderson boy to help with the branding last week. Otherwise, it's just me. That's a lot of work for one man, she observed. Work keeps the mind occupied, he replied simply. When Abigail placed a plate of perfectly cooked eggs and bacon before him, the sight nearly brought tears to his eyes. It had been so long since he'd eaten a proper meal in his own home. Thank you, he said, the words inadequate for the gratitude he felt. Abigail sat across from him with her own plate. You're welcome. They ate in companionable silence, the ticking of the clock on the mantel marking the passing minutes. When they finished, Theo cleared his throat. You'll be late for school, he said, noting the sun's position through the window. It's Saturday, Mr. Sullivan, Abigail replied with amusement. No school today. Theo felt his face flush. He'd lost track of the days since Martha died. Everything had blended together in a haze of grief and work. Still, he said, standing and gathering the plates, I've taken enough of your time. Abigail watched him for a moment, then rose and took the dishes from his hands. Sit down, Theo. We need to talk. Something in her tone made him obey. He lowered himself back into his chair, watching as she efficiently washed the breakfast dishes. Martha asked me to look after you, she said without turning around. Before she passed. She knew you'd be too stubborn to ask for help. Theo stiffened. I don't need looking after. Evidence suggests otherwise, Abigail replied dryly, gesturing to the kitchen. Your clothes need mending, your house needs cleaning, and you clearly need someone to cook before you poison yourself. And you're volunteering? He asked skeptically. Abigail turned to face him, drying her hands on a towel. I'm proposing an arrangement. I'll come by 3 times a week, mornings before school and Saturdays, to help with cooking and housekeeping. In exchange, you'll help repair the schoolhouse roof before the rainy season. Theo frowned. The town should be handling that. The town council claims there's no money. She shrugged. And I have 20 children who'll be sitting in puddles come October if nothing's done. He considered her offer. It was practical, addressing both their needs without charity. Still, the thought of someone else in Martha's kitchen, using her things. I can find someone else if you prefer, Abigail said softly, reading his hesitation. Mrs. Wilkins from church might. No, Theo interrupted quickly. Mrs. Wilkins was a notorious gossip who would have the whole territory thinking he was courting again within days. Your arrangement is fair. I accept. Abigail nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Good. I'll return Monday morning before school. In the meantime, she moved to the pantry and began organizing the scattered supplies, setting aside items beyond salvaging and arranging the rest. You don't have to do that now, Theo protested. Consider it a gesture of good faith, she replied, continuing her work. Unable to dissuade her, Theo reluctantly left for his daily chores, the comforting sounds of someone moving about the house following him out the door. By the time Abigail departed that afternoon, the kitchen was transformed. Counters gleamed, shelves were organized, and she'd left a stew simmering that would provide meals for 2 days. She'd also written simple instructions for warming it without burning it, which Theo found both helpful and slightly insulting. That evening, as he ate alone at his table, Theo realized the house felt different. The crushing weight of emptiness had lifted slightly. He wasn't sure if he should feel grateful or guilty about that fact. Monday morning arrived with Abigail appearing promptly at dawn, a basket of fresh eggs and vegetables from her own garden in hand. She worked efficiently, preparing breakfast and leaving sandwiches for his midday meal before departing for the schoolhouse. When Wednesday came, she repeated the routine, adding mending his shirts to her tasks. By Saturday, Theo found himself watching the road for her wagon earlier than necessary, an anticipation he hadn't felt in months warming his chest. You look better, she commented as they ate breakfast together. Less hollow. Theo touched his face self-consciously. He'd started shaving more carefully, and had trimmed his beard that morning. Regular meals help. And regular company, Abigail added perceptively. He couldn't deny it. The emptiness of the house had been as debilitating as grief itself. Having someone to speak with, even briefly, had eased that particular pain. "When do you want me to look at that schoolhouse roof?" he asked, changing the subject. "Tomorrow after church? The children would appreciate it. Many of them ask about you." Theo hadn't attended services since the funeral. The thought of facing the congregation's pitying looks had kept him away. "I'll meet you thereafter," he compromised. Abigail's slight frown showed her disappointment, but she nodded acceptance. The following afternoon, Theo rode into town, tools loaded in his wagon. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Tucson, a simple wooden structure that served the community's children. As promised, Abigail waited on the steps, now dressed in practical work clothes rather than her teaching attire. "I didn't expect you to help," Theo said, unloading his ladder. "It's my school," she replied simply, already gathering shingles. They worked side by side through the afternoon, Theo handling the more dangerous tasks on the roof while Abigail passed materials and prepared replacements. The easy rhythm they established surprised him. She anticipated his needs without being told, and her practical nature meant she never flinched from the dirtier aspects of the work. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, Theo secured the last shingle and climbed down. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his hands were rough from the day's labor. "That should hold through winter," he said, surveying their work with satisfaction. Abigail smiled, pushing a strand of hair from her flushed face. "The children will be delighted. No more learning arithmetic with buckets catching drips." They cleaned up in companionable silence, loading tools back into the wagon. When they finished, an awkward moment stretched between them. "Would you," Abigail began, just as Theo said, "Perhaps you'd." They both stopped, sharing a small laugh at the timing. "Ladies first," Theo offered. "I was going to ask if you'd like to join me for dinner," Abigail said. "As thanks for today's work." Theo hesitated. Dining alone with Abigail in town would start talk, something neither of them needed. But the thought of returning to his empty house held little appeal after a day in her company. "I'd be honored," he replied. "Though perhaps we should avoid the saloon." Abigail's eyes sparkled with amusement. "I thought we might eat at my home. It's small, but the garden's lovely this time of year." The invitation surprised him. Unmarried women rarely entertained men alone in their homes, but Abigail had never seemed concerned with conventions. As the schoolteacher, she occupied a unique position in town society that afforded her certain freedoms. "That would be nice," Theo agreed. Abigail's cottage sat behind the schoolhouse, a teacher's residence provided by the town. It was indeed small but meticulously maintained, with a garden of vegetables and flowers that showcased her careful attention. Inside, the single room was neat and organized, with a curtain separating her sleeping area from the main living space. Books lined every available surface, speaking to her passion for learning. Theo felt immediately comfortable in the space, which reflected Abigail's practical nature while maintaining feminine touches. "It's not much," she said, watching him take in her home. "It's perfect," he replied honestly. "Suits you." Abigail busied herself with dinner preparations while Theo awkwardly stood by, unsure of his role in this unfamiliar setting. "You could set the table," she suggested, noticing his discomfort. "Plates are on that shelf." Grateful for the task, Theo arranged the simple tableware while Abigail prepared a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables that filled the small space with enticing aromas. Over dinner, their conversation flowed more freely than Theo expected. Abigail shared stories of her students' antics, while he found himself talking about the cattle and his plans for the ranch, practical matters he'd kept to himself since Martha's passing. "How did you become a teacher?" he asked as they finished eating. "Most women your age are married with children." A shadow crossed Abigail's face. "I was engaged once to a man from back east. He died of pneumonia before the wedding." Her voice held old pain, but no fresh grief. "Afterward, I decided to make my own way. Teaching seemed the best use of my education." "I'm sorry," Theo said quietly. "It was 10 years ago, she replied with a small smile. Life continues, whether we wish it to or not. The simple truth of her statement resonated with Theo. Life indeed continued, pulling him forward despite his resistance. How did you meet Martha? Abigail asked, changing the subject. Theo's expression softened at the memory. At a dance in Phoenix. I was working as a ranger then, and she was visiting relatives. She laughed at my terrible dancing but agreed to a second attempt anyway. She always said you swept her off her feet. Abigail smiled. More likely stepped on them. Theo chuckled. But she was kind about it. As night fell, they moved to Abigail's small porch, where the cooling desert air provided relief from the day's heat. Stars appeared overhead, brilliant in the clear sky, while crickets and distant coyotes provided nature's music. Thank you, Theo said suddenly. Not just for dinner, but for everything these past weeks. Abigail turned to him, her face half shadowed in the fading light. You're welcome. Though I suspect Martha arranged it all from above. She would have liked that idea. Theo agreed. She always did have to have the last word. They shared a laugh that felt like healing, remembering Martha with fondness rather than sorrow. When Theo finally took his leave, something had shifted between them, a friendship deepening into something neither was ready to name. The weeks that followed established a routine that gradually altered both their lives. Abigail's visits to the ranch expanded from 3 mornings to include occasional evenings when she would bring schoolwork and grade papers at his kitchen table while he repaired tack or worked on accounts. They would share dinner and conversation before she returned to town, each visit extending slightly longer than the last. In town, people noticed. Mrs. Wilkins made pointed comments after church about proper morning periods, while the saloon crowd exchanged knowing looks when Theo declined poker nights to return home. Neither Theo nor Abigail acknowledged the gossip, maintaining that their arrangement was practical rather than romantic. But as autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light to the desert, their denial became increasingly difficult to maintain, even to themselves. The moment of reckoning came unexpectedly one Tuesday evening in late September. Theo had ridden into town for supplies and stopped by the schoolhouse as classes ended, offering Abigail a ride home. She'd accepted gratefully, her arms full of books and papers. As they traveled the familiar road, a sudden thunderstorm, rare but violent in the desert, overtook them. Rain poured in blinding sheets, turning the dirt road to mud within minutes. We'll never make it to town in this, Theo shouted over the downpour. The ranch is closer. Abigail nodded, clutching her sodden books to her chest as Theo urged the horses toward shelter. By the time they reached the ranch house, both were drenched, water streaming from hats and clothing. Inside, Theo quickly lit lamps and built up the fire while Abigail stood shivering in the doorway. You need dry clothes, he said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. I can offer you one of my shirts, unless... He hesitated, then crossed to a trunk in the corner. From it, he withdrew a simple dress, one of Martha's that he hadn't been able to give away with the others. It might fit, he said, holding it out to her. Martha was taller, but... Abigail accepted the garment with understanding in her eyes. Thank you. It's practical in these circumstances. She changed behind a screen while Theo tactfully busied himself in the kitchen, putting coffee on to boil. When she emerged, wearing his late wife's dress with her wet hair braided down her back, something caught in Theo's chest, not grief, but a startling recognition of how right she looked in his home. The rain's not letting up, Abigail observed, accepting the steaming mug he offered. Theo nodded, aware of the delicate situation developing. You'll have to stay the night. I can make up the spare room. They both knew what this meant. An unmarried woman spending the night alone with a widower, regardless of the circumstances, would be fodder for gossip that could damage Abigail's standing as a teacher. People will talk, she said simply. People already talk, Theo replied. The question is whether we care. Abigail sipped her coffee, considering his words. Do you care, that is? Theo met her gaze steadily. I care about your reputation. I care about your position. But I don't care what Mrs. Wilkins or anyone else thinks about us. The word hung between them, acknowledging something they'd both been carefully avoiding. Is there an us, Theo? Abigail asked quietly. Or are we just two lonely people finding comfort in routine? The question deserved honesty. Theo set his mug down and moved to the window, watching rain lash against the glass while gathering his thoughts. When Martha died, he began slowly, I thought that was the end of anything good in my life. I was existing, not living. Then you walked in one morning and took over my kitchen. He turned to face her. And somehow, you started putting my life back together, one meal at a time. Abigail's expression remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around her mug. That doesn't answer my question. I'm getting there, Theo said with a small smile. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I've come to care for you, Abigail. Not as Martha's friend or as a convenient arrangement, but as a woman I admire and enjoy being with. I find myself watching the road for your wagon, counting hours between your visits. That seems like an us to me, if you're amenable. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Abigail set her mug down carefully, her movements deliberate. I didn't intend this, she said softly. When I came that first day, I truly was fulfilling a promise to Martha. I expected to help for a week or two until you found your footing. Theo nodded, preparing himself for gentle rejection. But then, Abigail continued, I found myself looking forward to those mornings here. Planning meals days ahead. Wondering about your day when we weren't together. She met his eyes directly. I'm amenable to an U.S., Theo. More than amenable. Relief and joy flooded through him. He crossed the room and took her hands in his, marveling at how small and capable they were. I'm not asking to replace what you had with Martha, Abigail said earnestly. I would never want that. Martha will always be part of me. Theo agreed. But she'd be the first to say life continues. And I think she'd approve of the direction mine is taking. Outside, thunder crashed dramatically, making them both jump and then laugh at their reaction. The tension broken, Theo gently pulled Abigail to her feet. Miss O'Connor, he said formally, though his eyes twinkled. Given the weather and our recently clarified feelings, would you do me the honor of sharing supper with me? I promise not to burn it. Abigail laughed, the sound warming the room more effectively than the fire. Mr. Sullivan, I believe I'll have to supervise the cooking, given your track record. Together they prepared a simple meal, moving around the kitchen with the easy familiarity of their established routine, though now each accidental touch carried new meaning. They talked of practical matters, what this would mean for her position, how the town would react, whether their arrangement would change. I should still have my own home, Abigail said firmly. At least until. She didn't finish the thought, but Theo understood. Until marriage became a conversation. It was too soon for that discussion, despite the clarity of their feelings. Of course, he agreed. Though I hope you'll spend more evenings here. Properly chaperoned by the memory of Mrs. Wilkins' disapproval, of course. Abigail's laugh echoed through the kitchen. A powerful deterrent indeed. The storm raged through the night, but inside the ranch house, a peaceful warmth prevailed. True to his word, Theo prepared the spare room for Abigail and bid her a gentlemanly good night at its door. Both knew that appearances needed to be maintained, regardless of the circumstances that had brought them to this point. Morning arrived with clearing skies and a muddy landscape that would make travel difficult. Over breakfast, they discussed practical considerations of their new understanding. We should speak with Reverend Thomas, Theo suggested. Not about marriage, he added quickly, seeing Abigail's startled expression. But having him know the truth of last night's circumstances would help quiet gossip. Abigail nodded agreement. And perhaps we should be more open about our courtship. Secrecy only feeds speculation. The word courtship brought a smile to Theo's face. It seemed old-fashioned but perfectly appropriate for what was developing between them. When the roads dried enough for travel, Theo drove Abigail back to town in his wagon, either hiding the fact that she'd spent the night at his ranch. They stopped first at the Reverend's home, explaining the situation with straightforward honesty. The older man listened without judgment, then offered his blessing on their developing relationship. "Life is too short to deny happiness when it finds you," Reverend Thomas said, his kind eyes understanding. "Martha would want you both to find joy." The following Sunday, Theo attended church for the first time since the funeral, sitting beside Abigail in a pew that sparked immediate whispers. Afterwards, they walked openly through town together, making their courtship public knowledge. As winter approached, their routine evolved. Abigail maintained her teaching position and her cottage, but spent weekends at the ranch, returning to town with Theo on Sunday evenings. Their relationship deepened through shared work and conversation, each discovering the layers beneath their initial impressions. Theo learned that beneath Abigail's practical exterior lay a passionate love of poetry, and a surprisingly adventurous spirit that had once led her to climb the schoolhouse bell tower during a meteor shower. Abigail discovered that Theo's gruff manner hid a gentle soul who could recite Shakespeare from memory, and who carved intricate wooden figures for the ranch children at Christmas. By spring, when desert wildflowers painted the landscape in brilliant colors, their path forward seemed clear. On an April evening, with the scent of blossoms drifting through open windows, Theo prepared dinner himself successfully, for the first time since Abigail had entered his life. "You've been practicing," she accused good-naturedly, surveying the perfectly roasted chicken and vegetables. "I had a good teacher," Theo replied, pulling out her chair. They ate by candlelight, reminiscing about the first disastrous meals and the subsequent changes in both their lives. When they finished, Theo cleared the plates himself, then returned to the table with a small wooden box. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "about how you walked into my kitchen that morning and took over a pot I was determined to ruin." Abigail watched him with quiet intensity, sensing the importance of the moment. "You saved more than my breakfast that day," Theo continued. "You saved me from becoming a bitter, lonely man who couldn't even feed himself properly." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "I'm wondering if you might consider taking on the job permanently." Tears filled Abigail's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Are you asking me to marry you, Theodore Sullivan?" "I am," he confirmed. "Though I should warn you, I might still burn the occasional meal, just to maintain tradition." Abigail laughed through her tears. "In that case, I accept both the proposal and the ongoing cooking challenges." Theo slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned across the table to seal their engagement with a tender kiss. As he drew back, he saw Martha's approval and the depth of his own happiness, the continuation of life she would have wanted for him. They married in June, with the school children forming an honor guard outside the church and the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Wilkins declared it indecently soon, but brought the largest cake to the reception. The Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with evident pleasure, reminding the congregation that love was a blessing whenever it arrived. Abigail moved her books and teaching materials to the ranch house, transforming the spare room into a study where she continued to grade papers and prepare lessons. She maintained her position at the school, riding in with Theo when he went to town for supplies and becoming known for her innovative teaching methods that incorporated the practical aspects of ranch life. Their home became a gathering place for the community, with regular Sunday dinners after church and special celebrations for holidays. Children from town visited regularly, drawn by Theo's stories of his ranger days and Abigail's patient tutoring. On their first anniversary, Theo once again attempted to prepare breakfast alone, producing a slightly scorched but recognizably edible meal that he proudly served to Abigail in bed. "You've improved," she acknowledged with a smile. "Though I think I'll still need to supervise the more complex dishes. I still burn things occasionally just so you'll take the spoon from my hand," Theo confessed, sitting beside her. "I like watching you work in our kitchen." Abigail leaned against his shoulder, contentment evident in her expression. "Our kitchen. I never imagined how right that would sound when I walked in that first morning. Best day of my life," Theo said sincerely. Even if my pride took a beating. Your pride survived, Abigail teased. And if all goes well, in about 7 months, your pride might have something new to focus on. It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Theo's face transformed with wonder and joy. Are you certain? He asked, his voice hushed. Abigail nodded, her hand drifting to her still flat stomach. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before telling you. Theo gathered her carefully into his arms, overwhelmed by the gift life had given him, a second chance at love and family, all because a determined schoolteacher had decided his cooking needed intervention. I love you, he whispered against her hair. More than I have words to say. I know, Abigail replied, her voice steady and sure. And that's more than enough. Outside, the Arizona sun rose over the landscape they both loved, promising another day of the life they built together, one meal, one conversation, one shared moment at a time.